particularly surprised there's anybody here tonight, because according to the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, Joanne Lamont, on the 25th of February this year, she said we're not genetically programmed in Scotland to make political decisions. So not only are we too poor, you're too stupid as well. What I want to talk to you tonight is about power. The referendum is about power. That's what it's about. We don't have it, and I want us to have it, and if we've got any brains, we will want us to have it. Because devolution is an illusion of power. Enough power in the great debates we had in the 1970s, put his finger on it, devolution is power retained at Westminster. That's where the absolute power is always retained. And I want to talk to you about the relationship of failure to power. My generation failed, let me tell you. I came into the socialist movement, well, I was born in it, but I was in the Royal Navy. When I left it, I joined the Labour Party, the trade union movement, and the broad socialist movement. And my generation had an ambition. It was to shift the wealth and power to the working people and their families. We failed. If you look at our society today, we have 1 million out of 5 million population living below the poverty line, and many of them are the working poor. We have things that we never conceived of in 1960, like 0-hour contracts. And I'll tell you how they work. I met 5 women up in the Central Belt who worked for a hotel. The owner gave one of them a permanent contract at minimum wages. The other 4 are on 0 contract. The month they described to me, week 1, the hotel was busy, all 5 were engaged. Week 2 and 3, the hotel was quiet, 4 of them were laid off. Week 4, they were brought back. Week 2 and 3, no money. Gas, electricity, rent still have to be paid. The wains have still got to be fed. What do? They have to go to a food bank. And 2 weeks ago on Friday, the food bank in Drumchapel, such as the pressure on it, run out of food. We've got, if you go to a little store in Scotland, every single little store has a huge billboard outside it. I passed one in Aberdeen, I had 2 in case we didn't get the message. Little and Scottish Television have a campaign to raise funds to alleviate poverty among children. And that billboard, and it's got hearts all over it, no attacking Little or STV, they mean well. But it starts, 1 in 5 Scottish children are living in poverty. 1 in 9 are living in extreme poverty. So my generation has been shifted the balance of wealth and power to working people and their families. What has happened is that the balance of wealth and power has shifted to a minority, making us one of the grossly inequality countries to be found anywhere in the developed world. When I was MP for South Ayrshire in 1973, we debated a document called Born to Fail, about what happens to children who are born into poverty. It is worse in 2014 than it was in 1973. And Elaine knows very well what happens. The previous Chief Medical Officer for Scotland, Dr. Harry Burns, did a tremendous amount of work on what happens to a child born into poverty. And what he found was, from the womb, not from birth, from the womb until the age of 3 is the decisive period in a child's life. If they're born into poverty, their chances of educational advancement are worse than any other child's, and their advancement into adulthood, they're handicapped from the very beginning. I don't want to see any child in the future born to fail, but my generation failed, and we've got to say we failed. Not because we didn't try or didn't want to do so. We in the socialist movement in Scotland were always trumped by an English Tory majority. And even when the Labour Party was in power south of the border, they were always influenced by Middle England, who could never really understand the socialist impulse that came from north of the border. One of the reasons I came out of retirement for this campaign is that I am outraged at the situation of our people at the present time. But I'm also not hopeful. I am certain that whereas my generation failed because we didn't have independence, the generations that are coming after me, the huge numbers of young, talented people I have met in this campaign, they will be able to shift the balance of wealth and power to the working people and their families. We, the working class, are in a minority in the UK. In Scotland, the Scottish working class is in the majority. We can mobilise and we'll get a yes vote. We are important people in this campaign. Vote yes a minute after that, on the 18th, we, the working class, become very important people. Because if we mobilise, we'll have a working class majority in Parliament and Holyrood, and a working class government producing the policies that will in fact eradicate poverty, will ensure that no child is born to fail. That's the reasons I've come back into this campaign. I wasn't always in favour of independence. I won a by-election in South Ayrshire in 1970 as a British Unionist. I was known as the hammer of the nationalist in Ayrshire. And I went to London believing it. 2 years down there and I began to wonder if I had been right. And I sat down and I wrote myself a memorandum. Argued with myself. And the conclusion was, what are you going to do about it? Well, I took the compromise road. I didn't go for independence, I went for devolution, because we were still within that great bubble of the United Kingdom. But I discovered something, once I'd taken the unionist cast off my mind, that I could think of things that we could do that previously I hadn't done. Then I discovered the illusion of power in devolution. Because no matter what they say, devolution always has a limit upon it. It took me 12 years to move from a British Unionist to independence. Any Labour voter in the audience tonight, you don't have 12 years, you've got a fortnight to make the journey that I did. And it's worthwhile. One of the things that Margot said was that out of self-respect comes self-confidence. And out of self-confidence comes imagination and innovation. And the whole world opens up to us with independence. And that's true. Once I had moved into an independent frame of mind, where I didn't have to worry about what anybody anywhere south of the border or elsewhere thought of my opinion, if I could carry the majority, that's what was actually going to happen. If we vote no, just consider this. For about 30 years, the Scottish issue has been at the top of the United Kingdom agenda. Vote no, and we remove all political influence from Scotland forever. They will have called our bluff. They will have said, we put it in front of you, you failed, you don't want it, you want to become virtually a region of England, and that is how you will be treated. Now, talk about power. The Tories, and I regret to say so, genuinely, and the Labour allies have told us, don't worry about the NHS. Yes, it's being privatised down in England, but it can't happen up here because the Scottish Parliament has operational control of the NHS. There's a huge difference between operational control, budget control, and absolute control. There's £25 billion worth of cuts coming next year and year and year and year after that. We're going to get our share of that. And if we voted no, and we have no political power whatsoever, and we start complaining, they'll tell us, privatise your NHS the same as we've done south of the border. And I'll tell you how they set about it south of the border. They got think tanks to produce ideas which attack the fundamental principle of the NHS, extol the virtues of the private sector going in there and making it more efficient. And finally, the whole principle of the NHS in England has crumbled. And that's what they'll do up here. I'm not saying that we vote no and a fortnight later they'll privatise the NHS. There will be relentless pressure upon us to do so. They also have the power, let me tell you, to do it themselves if we resist. Most people in Scotland are not aware of Section 28, subsection 7 of the 1998 Act. Section 28 sets out the competency one by one of the Scottish Parliament. 28, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then you come to subsection 7. And these are the exact words. This section does not affect the power of the Parliament of the United Kingdom to make laws for Scotland. They can overrule our Parliament any time they want. They use that power to transfer 6,000 square miles of Scottish North Sea waters to England. If any of you doubters, and you're up at Carluke, and your ball lands in the sea, it's landed in England, not in Scotland. That's what they did. And a fortnight ago, they took powers away from the Scottish Parliament in the realm of renewable energy. So they can do what they like with any policy in Scotland using that power. Power. I want to tell you the story of the Firth of Clyde. Again, we're a bit distant from it, but it's instructive about how important power is. I'm going to read you two official government documents. They were released under the 30-year rule. Exploration for oil in the Firth of Clyde. In 1981, three companies, BP, BNOC and Horizon, undertook seismic surveys in an area south of Arran and east of Kintyre. Although the results have not been disclosed, the data gained led BP to apply for a production licence in the summer of 1981. The company applied for a very extensive area covering the entire breadth of the Firth, south of Arran. We were not informed why the applicant did not pursue the licence or how it was turned down, but it is reasonable assumption that opposition from the Ministry of Defence and others played a large part in that decision. Why did they not proceed? Well, it's there in a letter dated the 1st September 1983, which refers to a letter written by a man called Roger Mansell of the Ministry of Defence on the 17th of September 1981. BP applied in the summer. Mansell wrote to the Department of Energy in September. When he wrote about the previous proposals, which covered the entire breadth of the Firth, Roger Mansell said in his paragraph 4 that he had to ask that no rights would be permitted on the seaward part of that area. This blanket refusal to agree to any right under any circumstances rules out testing the area's hydrocarbon potential, and I would expect only very compelling reasons would lead the MOD to such a request. It was called Polaris, and today it's called Trident. Now bear that date in mind, 1981. Mrs. Thatcher's government was destroying the engineering and industrial base of Scotland on the mainland. And under the waters of the Firth of Forth was an industry that could have created jobs from Stranraer, Ayrshire, Inverclyde, Glasgow, Dumbarton and Clydebank. And that was kept secret from us. Polaris sailed, then Trident sailed, as unemployment rose, as poverty bit upon the people. I've been in Glasgow and I've seen people damaged by poverty, because poverty isn't just removal of the kind of food they should get and the material circumstances. Poverty crushes human beings, crushes their body and soul. So we had an industry waiting to be born, strangled at birth, with a price paid for generations of people in the west of Scotland. And the reason is, we didn't have the power. Vote yes, and we have that power. No problem for us whatsoever. Trident goes. Now I know Alex said that we had 5.5 years. Well, I don't think, given the levels of poverty, unemployment and the need for good jobs, we can wait 5.5 years before we start exploiting the Clyde. So we'll have to tell the Ministry of Defence and the Royal Navy that it's being exploited. The rigs are going down, and they better get a better sat-nav than they've got at the present time. I want you to consider what has happened in the history of the Scottish working class when we've had no power. The best way to describe the role of the Scottish working class in our history is defence. In 1915, the women in Glasgow went on a red strike to try and defend the standard of living of their families. We've always used our energy to defend ourselves, defend against closures, pack closures, industrial closures, Ravenscraig, Bathgate, Linwood, the poll tax, now it's the bedroom tax. Always using our energy to defend ourselves against policies we would never vote for in a million years. Think what it'll be like. Think what Margot was saying. Use your imagination. When we have power, and we are not yoked to a Tory government south of the border, all that energy that is being released in this great civic movement of which you are a part, the greatest Scotland's ever seen. Think of that energy being used to progress policies for the working class people and their families. It's not a matter of us having some sort of mini UK economic structure. We want something entirely different for our people. We want to take our resources. We want to take the greatest resource of all, and that's our children. Do you realise that our children are going to live in a very different era from the one I grew up in? For the last 400 years, the world has been dominated by the Atlantic axis, east coast of America and Europe. We were the great powers, economically, diplomatically, politically, and militarily. That era has gone. We're entering the period, for a long time to come, of the rise of Asia and Pacific. We are 5 million people. We have to find our niche in that new world. And the greatest thing we can do is invest in our children. Invest in their education. In my early days in the socialist movement, we used to dream. We had the uncertificated teachers in 1960. We dreamt not just of a professional teaching group, but being able to give our children the kind of education that was given to the rich in Eton and Harrow and elsewhere. We can do that. When we are independent, nothing stops us from doing what we want to do. And that's the important point we have to get across in the 2 weeks before polling day. As Aileen said, between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. on the 18th of September, we, the people in Scotland, for the first time ever, are absolutely sovereign. All the power we need to decide the fate of this nation lies in our hands in those 15 hours. Vote no and we destroy ourselves. Vote yes and we transform our country. I would like to end, I started with a quote, sour, negative and insulting, from Joanne Lamont. I would like to end with a quote from Margaret MacDonald, which is both challenging and uplifting. This is our time of reckoning. We've got to take it. And if we don't take it, we are consigning our children to much less than we've had. To narrow horizons, lower aspirations. We are consigning our children to being small when we should be giving them a much bigger world.